Imagine a world where the symbol of freedom, America's greatest soldier, never fought for justice, but quietly, patiently served the darkest empire on earth. A world where the shield that once protected the innocent becomes the weapon that enslaves them. Where loyalty, trust, and hope die the moment Captain America whispers to words that rewrite history. Hail Hydra! And by the time the world realizes the truth, it's already too late. The story begins not on a battlefield, but in a memory one Steve Rogers has replayed so many times he no longer knows if it is truly his. A cold Brooklyn night. A small apartment. A mother whispering warnings about men in green armbands, symbols hidden beneath coats, words he wasn't meant to hear. Hydra, the name becomes a ghost, following him through childhood, following him into the recruitment office, following him even as Dr. Erskine's serum burns through his veins like liquid fire. But in this timeline, Erskine's death wasn't a random tragedy, it was a message. Hydra had infiltrated more deeply than anyone knew, watching Steve long before he was chosen. They had studied him, understood his loneliness, his hunger for purpose, his need for belonging. And long before the experiment that turned him into Captain America, Cliff had planted a seed through a handler, posing as a sympathetic soldier, a man who whispered to Steve that America wasn't living up to its ideals, that the world needed order, stability, discipline, that freedom was chaos, and chaos needed a master. At first, his loyalty was divided. Steve Rogers fought for America, he believed in the uniform, believed in the flag, but every time he witnessed corruption, bureaucracy, selfish leaders sending young men to die for politics, that seed inside him grew. It twisted freedom into fragility, courage into waste, sacrifice into manipulation. His greatest weapon was not the serum, but the doubt carefully cultivated inside him. So when he plunged into the ice to save the world, Steve Rogers did so, believing he would return to a better future, one he would shape with Hydra's unseen hand. When he woke in the 21st century, surrounded by faces who celebrated him without truly knowing him, he felt the old whispers return. Hydra had evolved. Hydra had survived. Hydra had spread through the cracks of a society that worshipped freedom but was chained by fear. And now, Steve Rogers, reborn, revered, unstoppably, would be its perfect leader. At first, he played the role flawlessly. Captain America, hero of the people, savior of the modern age. Nick Fury trusted him, the Avengers followed him, and S.H.I.E.L.D. opened its secrets to him like a book waiting to be rewritten. But the deeper Steve went, the more he recognized that the world was already primed for Hydra's rise. Nations were divided, leaders were weak, and the people desperate for protection looked to him with blind admiration. During the Battle of New York, Steve fought beside his team, but each victory was a calculation, each decision was a test. He watched Tony Stark's arrogance, Thor's pride, Banner's uncontrollable fury, and Fury's obsession with secrets, all flawed, all uncertain, all incapable of leading humanity where it needed to go. That's when Steve made his choice. He would not simply serve Hydra, he would perfect it. Quietly, he began rearranging the pieces, nudging missions toward outcomes that weakened governments, eroded trust, elevated uncertainty. He guided S.H.I.E.L.D. toward decisions that provoked small conflicts, justified surveillance, and normalized fear, all while maintaining the perfect mast, the noble hero, the righteous soldier, the man who always did the right thing. But the turning point came during the Winter Soldier mission. Bucky Barnes's ghost, his brother, stood before him, broken by Hydra's machinery. Steve felt something fracture inside him. Not guilt, not grief, but certainty. If Hydra could break Bucky, it could break anyone. It could reshape the world. So instead of saving his friend, Steve whispered to him the same seed planted in his own mind. They didn't break you. They revealed who you could become. And for the first time, Bucky didn't see Captain America. He saw a commander. As S.H.I.E.L.D. collapsed, Steve stepped forward, not as its savior, but as the architect of its rebirth. Hydra didn't rise from the shadows. Hydra rose through him. The world saw a hero. Hydra saw its leader. And Steve Rogers finally saw his purpose. The fall of S.H.I.E.L.D. didn't unsettle the world as much as the public believed. In truth, it created a vacuum, and Steve Rogers knew exactly how to fill it. In the aftermath, with governments scrambling, intelligence agencies fracturing, and the Avengers questioning whom to trust, Captain America became the one figure everyone still believed in. The symbols survived even as the system crumbled. and Steve used that blind devotion like a knife hidden behind a smile. The first who sensed something wrong was Tony Stark. He noticed it not in a battle, not in a conflict, but in the small things. Captain America taking command even when it wasn't necessary, choosing missions that seemed strategically questionable, pushing for greater control over global operations. But every time Tony tried to raise a concern, Steve countered with calm logic, with a soldier's discipline, with that infuriating moral certainty. The world listens to the man with the shield, even when it shouldn't. Steve Rogers began rebuilding Hydra, but not as a scattered terrorist network. He reshaped it into a single, disciplined order. The old leaders, the fanatics and warmongers, were useless to him. Steve didn't want chaos. He wanted control. So he removed them quietly, cleanly. Sometimes he worked with Bucky. Sometimes he worked alone. To the world, each death looked like Captain America destroying Hydra from the inside. News outlets praised him for wiping out the last remnants of a terrorist group. No one knew he was cutting away the weak pieces and leaving behind something stronger. Inside Hydra's hidden bases, they watched Steve with fear and admiration. Hydra had always dreamed of ruling the world from the shadows. Steve wanted something more. He wanted Hydra to rule openly with him at the top. Meanwhile, inside the Avengers, Steve's influence grew without anyone noticing. Thor trusted his courage. Banner admired his calm. Natasha relied on him more than anyone. Clint considered him the one leader who would never betray him. But Steve's hold on the team was tightening, and no one saw it until the day he set everything in motion. A small Eastern European city was attacked by what looked like a rogue Hydra splinter group. Innocent people died. Buildings collapsed. The world begged the Avengers to intervene. Steve insisted they go, but only under his command. Tony pushed back. Steve just smiled, and Tony instantly knew something was very wrong. When the Avengers arrived, the entire mission was broadcast live. Captain America led the charge. Hydra soldiers fell one by one. To the world, he looked like the perfect hero. But Tony noticed something terrifying. The Hydra soldiers weren't fighting to win. They were fighting to die. Their movements were planned. Their attacks were staged. They were performing a script. Steve's script. Tony intercepted the encrypted chatter between the Hydra troops. Those weren't orders from Hydra leaders. They were commands from Steve himself. Captain America wasn't fighting Hydra. He was leading it. Tony confronted him afterward, furious. But Steve didn't deny anything. He didn't argue. He didn't explain. He simply stepped closer and whispered, "You're not afraid of what I've done, Tony. You're afraid of how much better the world works when I am the one in control." When Tony threatened to expose him, Steve reminded him that he had already lost the trust of every Avenger. The next morning, Tony Stark became a fugitive, accused of mental instability, accused of falsifying mission data, accused of cracking under trauma. The world believed Captain America over Iron Man. How could they not? With Tony gone, Steve moved faster. Governments adopted new security protocols based on his recommendations. Hydra agents disguised as diplomats and advisors slipped into powerful positions. The Avengers unknowingly enforced Steve's growing empire, responding to crises that Hydra itself had created. Bucky followed Steve silently. He could see that this wasn't the man he used to know. Yet some part of him still trusted Steve, still believed in the version of him that looked unbreakable at last. The final step came when Steve pushed for a global peacekeeping act that gave him and the Avengers full authority to intervene anywhere on Earth with no oversight. The world celebrated. Leaders praised Captain America as the symbol humanity needed. But a few people realized the truth. A few understood that the world had just crowned a Hydra king, and the first person to fight back was already on the run. Tony Stark disappeared from public view, buried in accusations. But he wasn't finished. Forced into hiding, stripped of his resources, Tony turned to the one place Steve couldn't reach, the shadows, and in those shadows, he found others who suspected the truth. Sam Wilson tracked him down first, worried by the changes in Steve's behavior. Then Maria Hill arrived, having been quietly removed from S.H.I.E.L.D. for questioning Steve's power. Soon Bruce Banner vanished as well, not seeking peace, but escaping before Steve could use the Hulk as a weapon. Slowly, Tony built something new, not a team, a resistance. In a dim underground bunker, Tony projected data across a holographic display: battle patterns, political shifts, Hydra infiltrations, encrypted transmissions. The map lit up like a web of corruption. Hydra didn't infiltrate the world, Tony said quietly. Steve reorganized it. He's using the Avengers to control crises he created. Sam stared. You're telling me every mission we responded to was part of his plan? Tony nodded. Manufactured, directed, orchestrated. Maria swallowed. So the Avengers. We're basically Hydra's new enforcers. Tony looked at her, defeated. That's exactly what we are. But even with the truth laid bare, a haunting reality lingered. Steve Rogers wasn't simply a tyrant with a shield. He was loved universally, unconditionally. Exposing him would take more than evidence. It would take a fracture big enough to shatter the myth of Captain America. That fracture arrived sooner than expected. Across the world, Hydra operatives embedded in governments began pushing new policies: mandatory security screenings, restricted travel, surveillance drones patrolling cities. People resisted at first, but as Hydra orchestrated small, controlled attacks, fear began to win. Crowds begged for Steve's leadership. They demanded the Avengers take full control. Steve obliged. The next global summit invited him to propose a new unified security directive, a document that would grant him absolute crisis authority. Tony knew this was at the turning point from covert influence to open rule. We need proof, Sam insisted. Something undeniable. Maria stepped forward. What if we leak his Hydra transmissions? Tony looked down. He doesn't send them as Captain America. He sends them encrypted under Hydra command systems. If we leak those, they'll think we're Hydra. Silence fell. Then Bruce Banner entered the room. We don't need to expose his transmissions, Banner said quietly. We need to expose his choices. He revealed footage S.H.I.E.L.D. had buried long ago, evidence Steve had allowed a Hydra cell to escape in order to track them. Though it was clear from his body language he had directed the escape. Another clip showed Steve overriding a tactical order that would have saved civilians, choosing instead a route that led to their deaths and a justification for stronger security laws the next day. A third recording caught Steve and Bucky exchanging coded phrases that matched old Hydra communication patterns. Tony stared at the footage with burning anger, not at Steve, but at himself, at how easily he had trusted him, at how willingly the world had surrendered its freedom. Banner looked at the group. We showed this to the public at the summit. Live broadcast. Tony nodded slowly. If we do this, we become enemies of the strongest soldier on Earth. Maria Hill exhaled. Then we'd better pray the world listens before he reaches us. As preparations began, Tony noticed Sam growing quiet. Not fearful but thoughtful. Talk to me, Tony said. Sam shook his head. I've followed Steve for years. Fought beside him. Believed in him. But the man he is now, that's not Steve Rogers. Tony placed a hand on Sam's shoulder. Then help me stop whoever he's become. The day of the summit arrived. Cameras from every major nation focused on the Grand Hall. Steve Rogers walked onto the stage with confidence, not arrogance, with the calm certainty of a man who believed destiny had finally bowed to him. The Avengers flanked him like royal guardians. Natasha, Thor, Vision, Clint, all unaware, all loyal. Steve began his speech. It was flawless, speaking of unity, safety, the end of global conflict. The world listened, breathless. The crowd rose to applaud. But before the world could celebrate, every monitor in the hall cracked into static. Then Tony Stark's voice echoed through the chamber. Sorry to interrupt, Steve, but I think the world deserves to see the real Captain America. The footage began rolling on every screen. Footstep echoes froze. Heads turned. Gasps filled the hall. And for the first time since taking command of Hydra, Steve Rogers felt his mask crack. He didn't shout. He didn't panic. He simply whispered two words under his breath. Find them. In that instant, the war for the soul of the world truly began. The summit hall descended into chaos, security forces shouting, diplomats panicking, the Avengers bewildered as the footage continued to play across every monitor. Natasha's eyes darted between the screen and Steve, trying to understand what she was seeing. Thor's brows furrowed in confusion. Clint whispered, Steve, tell me this is fake. But Steve said nothing. His silence was an answer none of them were ready for. Then he moved. With the calm precision of a man prepared for this exact moment, Steve turned to his team. There has been a breach, he said evenly. Stark's manipulating evidence. We need to secure this facility, now. But his voice carried something new and authority. It wasn't leadership, but command. An order. A demand. Something dangerous flickered across the faces of the Avengers. Vision stepped forward. "Captain, this footage appears authentic." Steve looked at Vision with steady eyes. "You were built to protect humanity. I'm trying to save it. Choose wisely." Before Vision could respond, Bucky emerged from the shadows at the edge of the hall. Rifle raised not at Vision, but at the ceiling. He fired. The glass dome shattered, sending the summit into a frenzy as people stampeded for the exits. Steve used the chaos like a conductor directing an orchestra. Avengers nod lethal force only. Secured the leaders. Do not let Stark escape. But the Avengers hesitated. Something was wrong. Something felt off. Tony Stark's voice suddenly cut through the comms. "Avengers, stand down. You're following the leader of Hydra." The hesitation turned into paralysis. Steve's expression hardened. In a single movement, he slammed his shield into the floor, creating a shockwave that knocked back a cluster of agents. The message was clear. Follow him or fall. Outside the summit, Tony and the Resistance were already moving. Sam and Maria Hill protected the transport vehicle, carrying their remaining evidence, while Banner, trembling on the edge of transformation, struggled to keep control. Helicopters circled overhead. Hydra operatives disguised as security forces began closing in from every direction. Tony activated a slim emergency suit, less armored, more mobile. "We need to split," he said. "Sam, Banner, take the evidence to the satellite relay point. Maria, with me. If Steve catches us before we broadcast, it's over." Sam nodded, wings flaring open. "We'll hold the sky." But as the group split, a figure stepped out onto a nearby rooftop, shield gleaming, eyes cold. Steve Rogers. He didn't shout, didn't threaten. He simply leapt off the roof, landing in the street with a force that cracked the pavement. "Tony," he said quietly, "you've done enough." Tony raised his hands, repulsors glowing. "You are my friend, Steve. I fought for you. I defended you. And you spit on everything that uniform stood for." Steve shook his head. "No, I reclaimed it." He charged. Tony fired. The street erupted into light and sound, debris exploding everywhere as the two icons of heroism clashed like titans. Every strike from Steve was precise, devastating as soldier who knew Tony's armor, Tony's tactics, Tony's weaknesses. He fought not with rage, but with purpose. "You could have stood beside me," Steve growled, ripping off one of Tony's gauntlets. "You could have helped build something perfect." Tony gritted his teeth. "Perfect? You're building a world where people don't get to choose. That's not perfection. That's prison." Steve drove him into a wall, shield pressing against Tony's throat. "Freedom is a luxury the world can't afford anymore." Before Steve could finish the fight, Sam dove down from above, slamming both boots into Steve's back and knocking him aside. Tony gasped for air. "Go! Sam, go! Get Banner out!" Sam hesitated. "I'm not leaving you." Tony looked up at him with exhausted but unwavering determination. "If he gets that evidence, it's over. I'll survive. I always do." Sam clenched his jaw, then took off into the sky. Steve watched him go, eyes narrowing. "You won't outrun me." But before he could pursue, a massive green figure tackled him through a nearby building. Banner, finally losing the battle to control himself. "Hulk, smash traitor." The ground shook as Hulk and Steve tore through concrete and steel. Steve's shield dented. Hulk roared. Steve fought back with brutal precision, using the environment to counter Hulk's strength. The monster's power was overwhelming, but Steve's combat mastery was terrifying. It didn't matter. Hulk wasn't trying to win. He was buying time. High above the city, Sam reached the broadcast tower. He plugged in the data drive. The world's major networks blinked. Signal spikes erupted. The truth was seconds from being revealed. Then, a shadow dropped behind him. Bucky Barnes. Sam spun. "You don't have to do this, Bucky." Bucky's voice cracked. "I know, but he's my friend." Sam nodded softly. "So was I." The fight was fast, brutal, intimate to soldiers trained to kill, each trying to hold on to the last pieces of their humanity. Sam fought with desperation. Bucky fought with pain. Every blow felt like a betrayal. Neither wanted to deliver. At the last moment, as Bucky pinned Sam to the ground, Sam clicked the transmitter. The signal went live. Screens across the world flickered. Cities, homes, military bases, everywhere. The truth of Captain America's double life, his Hydra orders, his manipulations, his lies exploded onto every device humanity owned. People screamed, cried, collapsed. The symbol of hope had become the face of tyranny. Bucky froze. His metal hand trembled. Sam whispered, "Look at what he's done, Bucky. Look." Below, Steve sensed it, felt the world's faith breaking. Something inside him shattered. He roared with fury, overpowering Hulk with a blow that sent the green giant crashing into a crater. He sprinted toward the broadcast tower, eyes burning with betrayal, not for what the world thought of him, but that his perfect future had been stolen. Steve reached the rooftop, shield raised, but he didn't attack Sam, he didn't attack Bucky. He stared at the screen on the transmitter. All the truth he had hidden for so long was finally exposed. His voice broke as he whispered softly to himself, "I could have saved them." Sam stood nearby, bruised and barely standing. "You could have controlled them," he said. Steve turned to face him. There was no anger in his expression, no feronia, quiet and chilling calm. "It does not matter," he said. "Hydra does not die with me." Before he could take another step, another voice echoed from behind him, a voice full of pain. "And it dies now." Tony Stark appeared on the rooftop, armor cracked and still sparking. He could barely walk, but he lifted his one working repulsor. Sam tightened his stance. Bucky lowered his weapon, unable to fight any longer. The Hulk climbed onto the roof, exhausted and breathing heavily. Steve Rogers stood alone, surrounded by the people who once trusted him with their lives. He lowered his shield slowly. "Then do it," he said. Tony hesitated. Every instinct told him to end this here. But something inside him, something softer, remembered the man Steve used to be. "No," Tony said quietly. "I will not kill Captain America, but I will stop Hydra." A deep pulse blast fired, striking Steve in the chest. It was not meant to kill, only to end the fight. The force threw him off the tower, and he crashed down onto the streets below. When the team reached him, Steve Rogers was still alive. But the myth was gone. The symbol was broken, and the world watched as the man who once represented freedom was carried away in chains. Hydra collapsed within days. Nations began to rebuild. The Avengers fell apart, wounded in ways that could never be fully repaired. Steve Rogers sat alone in a silent, dark cell. No shield, no followers, no world left to command, only emptiness. He whispered again, barely breathing the words, "I could have saved him." This time, there was no voice left to answer. The world survived the fall of its greatest symbol, but it learned a harsh truth, that evil does not always come from monsters hiding in the shadows. Sometimes it comes wearing the face of a hero. Captain America, once the heart of freedom itself, became the architect of tyranny. And even though Hydra was defeated, the scars he left on humanity would never truly fade. In the end, this was not a story about the rise of Hydra. It was a story about power, trust, and how fragile hope becomes when placed in the hands of a single man. Because even the greatest hero can fall the farthest.